Welcome to a journey through the shadows of human consciousness. These are thoughts we often push away, uncomfortable truths we rarely discuss. They exist in the quiet moments between our busy lives, when our minds wander to places we'd rather not go. This exploration is not meant to depress, but to acknowledge the full spectrum of human experience. Sometimes facing the darkness helps us better appreciate the light. Let us begin this contemplative journey together. Part 1. The Forgotten Self. Every day we pass hundreds of strangers on streets and in shops who will never know anything about our existence. Our entire life story, all our struggles and triumphs, remain completely invisible to them as they move through their own separate worlds. Even when our paths physically cross, we remain unknown universes to each other, entire lifetimes of memories and experiences passing without recognition. There are billions of people on this planet who will live their entire lives without ever knowing your name or that you walked this earth at all. Even those closest to you today know only fragments of who you truly are, and most of those fragments will fade from memory after you are gone. In the cosmic timeline, our human existence is impossibly brief, less than a single breath in the age of the universe. Stars formed and exploded for billions of years before the first human thought emerged, and will continue long after our species is forgotten. Our most pressing concerns, the worries that keep us awake at night, will not even register as footnotes in history. Most of what consumes your thoughts and energy today will be completely forgotten within a single century, erased like writing in sand. The achievements you work so hard for, the reputation you carefully build, may not matter or be remembered even 10 years from now. Your greatest anxieties, your deepest dreams, and your daily struggles will fade like footprints on a beach as the tide of time inevitably washes over them, leaving no trace. We are, in essence, temporary arrangements of atoms experiencing consciousness for a brief moment, pretending to be permanent beings of lasting importance. Part 2. Silent Suffering. Everyone you meet each day is fighting personal battles you know absolutely nothing about, carrying burdens invisible to your eyes. Behind casual smiles and everyday conversations lie pains too deep to express in regular social interactions. The colleague who seems irritable might be going through a divorce that tears at them every moment they're alone. The cheerful barista might return home to care for a parent with dementia, exhausted beyond words. Many people endure their greatest life struggles completely alone, never telling another soul about their burden because they see no point in sharing what cannot be fixed. They carry these weights silently through their days, fearing judgment or believing no one would truly understand their situation. Some adults carry childhood wounds that have shaped their entire personality and life choices without ever speaking of them to anyone, not even therapists or partners. These early experiences created patterns that determine how they love, work, and connect with others throughout their entire lives. The person who seems most put together in your social circle might be falling apart inside when they return home to empty rooms or difficult relationships. Their carefully constructed exterior hides a reality they cannot share without breaking the social contract of pleasant interaction. We all build and maintain careful masks to hide our deepest vulnerabilities, showing different faces to different people throughout our days. These masks become so familiar over time that we sometimes forget what lies beneath them, losing touch with our authentic selves. When someone suddenly changes their behavior or disappears from social life, we often never learn the true reason why their light dimmed. Their story remains untold, their pain unwitnessed by others who might have helped if only they had known. Part 3. Lost Connections. Our technology connects us more than ever before, yet many people feel profoundly alone while surrounded by digital crowds. We scroll through carefully curated highlights of others' lives while sitting alone in dark rooms, comparing our messy reality to their edited fiction. The constant stream of idealized images creates a standard no actual life can meet, leaving us feeling inadequate in comparison. Many modern friendships exist primarily through text messages and social media interactions, lacking the depth that comes with physical presence and shared experiences. These relationships feel real in many ways, but miss the subtle non-verbal cues, the shared silence and physical comfort that build true intimacy between people. The convenience of digital connection has made it easier to avoid the vulnerability of being truly present with others. Some people go days or weeks without experiencing meaningful human touch, a basic need for psychological health that was once taken for granted. This absence creates a hunger that cannot be satisfied by any number of likes, comments, or video calls, no matter how frequent. As we age beyond school and early adulthood, making new deep connections becomes increasingly difficult and rare as routines and responsibilities fill our days. The spontaneous friendships of youth give way to scheduled meetings and professional networks that serve specific purposes rather than nourishing our souls. Many elderly people speak to almost no one for days at a time, their social circles shrinking with each passing year as peers move away or pass on. Their lifetime of knowledge and experiences become trapped within them, unshared with a world that has moved on without them. Part 4. Time's Shadow. Each birthday celebration marks not just a year gained in experience, but also a year lost from our limited supply of time on Earth. The candles remind us that our time is steadily burning away with each passing moment, never to be recovered or relived. We often speak of spending time as though we had endless amounts in our account, not realizing the balance diminishes with every sunrise. We often realize the true value of time only after we have already spent it carelessly on things that brought no lasting meaning or joy. Youth is wasted on the young precisely because they cannot fully grasp its brevity or the swift acceleration of passing years that comes with age. The days seem long, but the decades pass with frightening speed, faster with each circuit around the sun. Most people will have their last conversation with loved ones without realizing it is the final one, parting with casual goodbyes that were never meant to be permanent. No farewell feels adequate when we later realize it was the last, leaving words forever unsaid and emotions unexpressed. The books you plan to read, places you hope to visit, and skills you intend to learn might remain forever in the realm of someday as time runs through your fingers. That someday often never arrives before time runs out. Dreams deferred until they simply expire with us. We carry mental images of parents, grandparents, and childhood friends exactly as they were when we last saw them, frozen in our memory like photographs. In reality, they continue changing, aging, becoming entirely different versions of themselves without us witnessing their transformation. Part 5. The Illusion of Control. We meticulously plan our lives as if we control our destiny, creating elaborate 5-year plans, career trajectories, and retirement strategies that presume a predictable future. In reality, a single unexpected event, diagnosis, accident, economic collapse, natural disaster, can destroy everything we've carefully built over decades in mere moments. The healthy body you completely take for granted could betray you tomorrow with a diagnosis that instantly divides your life into before and after, rendering previous concerns suddenly trivial. Our fundamental sense of control is largely a comforting fiction we maintain to function in a world characterized by randomness and uncertainty that would overwhelm us if fully acknowledged. The most significant events that have shaped your life path, where you were born, who your parents were, chance meetings that led to pivotal relationships or opportunities, happened without your planning or input. Yet we continue to believe future outcomes are primarily determined by our choices. Even our most carefully considered decisions are profoundly influenced by unconscious biases, cultural programming and neurological processes operating below awareness, making our sense of rational choice largely illusory. We save diligently for retirements that health may not permit us to enjoy, make promises about forever to partners who may leave or die, and build houses on geological fault lines while imagining permanence. This elaborate illusion of control provides necessary psychological comfort while concealing how fundamentally fragile, contingent, and dependent our existence truly is on forces we neither control nor fully understand. Part 6. Unspoken Regrets. Many people reach the end of their lives with profound regrets they've never spoken aloud to anyone, carrying private sorrow for paths not taken and opportunities forever lost. These silent regrets often center not on actions taken but on chances never seized. The love never declared, the risk never taken, the authentic self never expressed out of fear or obligation to others' expectations. There are words of appreciation and love withheld from people who desperately needed to hear them, now impossible to deliver because those people are gone forever. Opportunities for reconciliation, adventure, or creative expression missed through fear, procrastination, or misplaced priority on security over meaning cannot be recovered once health or time runs out. Parents privately wonder if their children would have been happier and healthier with different parenting choices, carrying guilt they can never express without burdening the very people they sought to protect. Many creative people take potential masterworks to the grave, artistic expressions or innovations that existed clearly in their minds, but were never manifested due to perfectionism, self-doubt, or practical concerns that seemed important at the time. Research consistently shows that the dying rarely wish they had worked more hours, accumulated more possessions, or achieved greater status, but instead regret not having lived more authentically, loved more openly, or taken more meaningful risks. The musician and philosopher Henry David Thoreau observed that most men lead lives of quiet desperation and go to the grave with the song still in them, their truest selves and deepest contributions never fully expressed or realized. Part 7. False Memories. Many of your most cherished and confidently held memories, the stories that form your very identity, never actually happened the way you recall them, existing as creative reconstructions rather than accurate recordings. Our minds continuously revise and reconstruct the past to maintain coherent self-narratives, editing details, emphasizing certain aspects while minimizing others to support our current self-image and beliefs. Childhood memories you're absolutely certain of might be entirely fabricated from family stories, photographs, and fragments of actual experience combined with imagination into convincing but fictional recollections. Studies repeatedly show that we unconsciously cast ourselves as more virtuous, rational, and central in past conflicts than objective evidence would support, protecting our self-concept at the expense of accuracy. Each time you recall an important memory, you're not accessing the original experience, but your last remembering of it. neurologically rewriting the memory with each retrieval and making it increasingly distant from what actually occurred. These memories change subtly with each recollection, incorporating new information, current emotional states, and evolving self-concept, drifting further from historical truth with each remembering. Family members often maintain wildly different and contradictory recollections of the same shared events, each person absolutely convinced their version captures what truly happened, while others' accounts are distorted. The past you base your identity and decisions upon is largely a creative fiction your brain has constructed to maintain coherence and meaning, not an accurate record of experiences that shaped you. Part 8. Unrecognized Loneliness. Many people in long-term marriages and partnerships feel profoundly alone despite decades of physical proximity, sharing homes, beds and daily routines, while their inner worlds remain completely separate. They maintain the external structures of intimate relationship, while experiencing a private desolation that may never be acknowledged even to themselves, let alone discussed with the person sleeping beside them each night. Some people have not been truly seen, heard or understood by another human being for decades, living behind pleasant facades and routine interactions, while their authentic thoughts, fears and desires remain completely unexpressed. Parents can feel deeply isolated while surrounded by the constant noise, demands and physical closeness of their children, experiencing a form of loneliness that feels particularly shameful because it contradicts cultural narratives about parental fulfillment. The loneliest place can be in a crowded room where everyone else seems connected and engaged, while you experience yourself as fundamentally separate, creating the painful contrast of physical togetherness with emotional isolation. Some highly social people maintain impressive networks and active social calendars while having no one they could call at 3 a.m. during a crisis who would actually answer and come to their aid without hesitation or resentment. Many individuals gradually realize they've spent years or decades performing a carefully constructed version of themselves rather than being authentic, creating the secondary loneliness of being liked and approved of for someone they know is not their true self. This performance creates exhaustion alongside isolation, the constant effort of maintaining a facade while the genuine self remains unseen and unexpressed, creating a deep existential loneliness that social activity cannot touch. Part 9. Invisible Influence. Your most deeply held beliefs, values and sense of identity were largely determined before you were intellectually equipped to evaluate them, installed during childhood by accident of birth rather than conscious choice. The political views you defend passionately, the religious or secular worldview that structures your understanding, and even your sense of what constitutes common sense all primarily reflect where and when you happen to be born rather than objective evaluation of alternatives. The media ecosystem you consume daily quietly shapes your perception of reality by determining which information reaches you, which experts seem credible, and which issues seem important, all while maintaining the illusion of your independent judgment. Sophisticated algorithms determine what information appears in your feeds and searches, creating personalized reality tunnels that reinforce existing beliefs while minimizing exposure to contradictory evidence or perspectives. Marketing and advertising have influenced your desires, preferences and sense of inadequacy since before you could speak, creating artificial needs and carefully crafted dissatisfactions designed to drive consumption rather than well-being. Your fundamental sense of what's normal and desirable was established by your early environment regardless of how healthy or dysfunctional it might have been, creating baseline expectations that feel natural regardless of whether they serve your actual flourishing. Even your core sense of self, who you believe you intrinsically are versus how you've been shaped, has been profoundly influenced by how others have treated, labelled and responded to you since infancy, creating self-fulfilling identities. The comforting illusion of independent thought and self-determination persists while invisible social, technological and psychological forces guide most of our daily choices and fundamental orientations toward life. Part 10. The Future's Absence. Every person you've ever known or loved will someday be completely gone from this world, their unique consciousness forever extinguished regardless of what beliefs about afterlife might comfort the living. Their voices, their laughter, their particular way of seeing the world, and all the accumulated wisdom of their lived experience will vanish permanently, preserved only temporarily and incompletely in fading memories and recordings. Places that hold your most precious memories and seem permanent features of your mental landscape will be altered beyond recognition or cease to exist entirely within a relatively short span of time. The childhood home that formed your earliest sense of place, the tree you climbed when seeking solitude, the corner store where you bought candy with carefully saved coins, all temporary arrangements in constant flux. Languages spoken fluently by millions today will eventually join Latin and ancient Greek as academic curiosities, rather than living tongues used for love, argument, poetry and daily communication. The books and films created now will become gradually incomprehensible to future generations as language evolves away from current usage, with meanings and references requiring scholarly explanation rather than immediate understanding. Humanity itself represents a temporary phenomenon in the story of Earth, rather than its culmination or purpose, one species among millions that will eventually disappear regardless of our technological achievements or sense of exceptionalism. Everything humans have created, preserved and valued throughout our entire history will eventually be forgotten completely, lost to time's relentless advance as though it never existed at all. Part 11. The Masks We Wear. Most people maintain entirely different personas for different audiences, unconsciously changing their beliefs, speech patterns, body language, and even fundamental values depending on social context. The version of yourself displayed at work differs markedly from the one shown to family, to friends, to romantic partners, or when completely alone with your unfiltered thoughts. We carefully curate which aspects of ourselves to display based on meticulous assessment of what will be rewarded or punished in each specific relationship and environment, becoming skilled performers of situational identity. Over time, these masks can become so habitual and automatic that we lose conscious awareness of the shape-shifting, genuinely experiencing each version as authentic in the moment, despite their contradictions. Some people realize in midlife or during existential crisis that they've been performing roles created to please others for so long that they've lost connection with their authentic desires, values and voice beneath the accumulated layers of adaptation. This realization creates the disturbing question, who am I really? A query that becomes increasingly difficult to answer with each passing year of social conditioning and strategic self-presentation. Many people carry the deep and often unacknowledged fear that if they showed their complete, unfiltered self, including their darkest thoughts, unconventional desires or genuine opinions, they would be rejected by everyone whose acceptance and love they value. This fear keeps the masks firmly in place, creating a lifetime of partial connections and conditional acceptance that never touches the full humanity beneath the performance, leaving the deepest parts of self perpetually unexpressed and unwitnessed. Part 12. Unacknowledged Grief. We experience countless small deaths and losses throughout life that we never properly mourn or even consciously recognize, creating a background sadness that colors existence without clear source. The friendship that slowly faded without formal ending, the career path abandoned for practical reasons, the home left behind during relocation, each represents a significant loss carrying genuine grief that social convention provides no ritual to honor. Each time we change significantly as persons, a version of ourselves dies and can never be recovered, creating a subtle mourning for past selves who no longer exist except in memory and photographs that capture strangers who were once us. The dreams we silently relinquish as impractical or impossible, as life narrows possibilities, becoming a dancer, living in Paris, having children after fertility ends, accumulate as unacknowledged losses carried privately. Parents experience profound grief as their children grow independent, a necessary loss woven into successful parenting but rarely discussed openly, since it conflicts with cultural celebration of children's healthy development. The body's slow decline brings continuous small bereavements for capabilities once taken for granted. Running without pain, reading without glasses, remembering without effort, now permanently lost, despite their previous centrality to our self-concept. Many carry nostalgia as a form of disguised grief for periods of life, places once called home, or communities that can never be experienced again as they exist now only in memory rather than physical reality. These unnamed and unacknowledged losses accumulate throughout a lifetime, creating an emotional backdrop of subtle sorrow for what once was and can never be again, a private museum of absence we carry within. Part 13. The Weight of Legacy. Most people harbour hopes of leaving some lasting impact on the world, yet demographic reality ensures that very few individuals will be remembered beyond 2 generations after their death. Even those who achieve remarkable fame, influence, or accomplishment during their lifetime often fade into obscurity with surprising speed once no living person remembers them directly. Consider your own great-grandparents. How much do you actually know about them as full human beings, beyond perhaps a name, photograph, or handful of facts or stories that capture almost nothing of their actual lived experience? The most deeply personal and meaningful aspects of who you are, your private thoughts, what made you laugh, the quality of your love, your particular way of seeing the world, will not survive in family memory beyond those who knew you directly. Projects and institutions you might devote decades to building can be dismantled, repurposed, or fundamentally altered shortly after your death, sometimes erasing any evidence of your contribution within years of your passing. Buildings bearing founders' names are eventually renamed, businesses you built from nothing are sold or shuttered, scientific discoveries are superseded, and artistic innovations become mere historical footnotes as culture moves relentlessly forward. Even digital records of our existence, the modern attempt at immortality through social media archives, photographs, and recorded thoughts, will eventually be deleted, corrupted, or become technologically inaccessible as storage systems evolve beyond current formats. Our desperate attempts to create lasting meaning through accomplishment and documentation often blind us to the temporary nature of all human endeavors, preventing us from investing fully in the experiences and connections that create meaning within our actual lifespans. Part 14. The Price of Awareness. Becoming more conscious and self-aware often leads initially to greater suffering rather than greater happiness, as increased perception reveals problems previously hidden by comforting ignorance. Those who think deeply about existence and develop critical consciousness must confront uncomfortable truths about themselves, their relationships, and social systems that others can comfortably ignore through unreflective living. Learning about historical and ongoing injustices, environmental destruction, or exploitation creates a burden of knowledge that cannot be unlearned or set aside once acquired, permanently altering one's experience of institutions and comforts previously enjoyed without complication. Seeing clearly the suffering of others and the complex interconnection of social problems makes simple pleasures and easy answers less satisfying, removing psychological buffers that protect those with less awareness. The more you understand about history, psychology, and systems of power, the more you recognize patterns of harm that continue unchecked, and your own inevitable participation in structures you may ethically oppose but cannot fully escape. Psychological research consistently shows that certain forms of ignorance correlate with higher self-reported happiness, while broader awareness of systemic problems correlates with increased distress, creating a perverse incentive against developing greater consciousness. Some knowledge, once gained, permanently alters how you see yourself and others, rarely for the more comfortable, as understanding the depth of unconscious bias, climate crisis, or intergenerational trauma cannot be selectively forgotten when inconvenient. The examined life may indeed be worth living, as Socrates suggested, but it rarely provides the comfort of unquestioned assumptions and simple narratives available to those who never peek behind society's curtains or their own psychological defences. Part 15. False foundations. Many of the foundational stories that give our lives structure and meaning are simplified fictions we collectively agree to treat as truth, constructing reality on foundations that would collapse under genuine scrutiny. National histories systematically emphasize moments of glory, progress, and moral clarity, while minimizing or completely omitting atrocities, exploitation, and contradictions that complicate patriotic narratives. Family narratives preserve comforting myths about ancestors' character, achievements, and relationships, while strategically burying uncomfortable truths about abuse, addiction, mental illness, or moral failings that contradict preferred identity stories. Religious certainties provide existential comfort precisely because they address ultimate questions that cannot be definitively proven or disproven, requiring faith that transcends evidence while providing community and meaning in exchange for suspended disbelief. Each generation's conviction that they live in uniquely important times represents a psychological constant throughout human history, with virtually every era believing itself to be experiencing unprecedented crisis or transformation rather than recognizing historical patterns. The modern belief in continuous progress, technological salvation, and humanity's special destiny ignores the cyclical nature of civilizations and the historical evidence that complex societies regularly collapse from a combination of environmental limits and internal contradictions. We base major life decisions, career paths, relationship commitments, financial investments, political allegiances, on cultural scripts that promise fulfillment and security, but often fail to deliver either in practice, leaving disillusionment in place of expected satisfaction. These foundational narratives, personal, familial, cultural, and existential, would crumble under rigorous examination, so we rarely examine them, instead treating necessary fictions as self-evident truths to avoid the vertigo of confronting contingency. Part 16. The Fragility of Society. The comfortable civilization we inhabit is far more fragile than we like to admit or consider. A few weeks without electricity would collapse most modern cities into chaos and suffering. Most people are 3 missed meals away from considering actions they currently find unthinkable. The supply chains that keep us fed, warm, and medicated depend on complex systems vulnerable to disruption. Historical examples show how quickly social order can dissolve when basic needs go unmet for even short periods. The veneer of civilization is thinner than we imagine, particularly in times of resource scarcity. Most people's moral certainties have never been tested under true duress or survival conditions. The comfortable assumption that it couldn't happen here has preceded countless societal collapses throughout history. Part 17. Unknown Influences. Your personality preferences and behaviors are shaped by factors you'll never be aware of or understand. Genetic predispositions, microbiome composition, and hormone levels silently guide your decisions daily. Early childhood experiences you cannot remember have programmed your responses to stress, conflict, and intimacy. Environmental factors from air quality to background noise levels affect your cognitive abilities without your awareness. Your brain makes most decisions before your conscious mind becomes involved, then creates rational explanations afterward. The illusion of conscious choice remains comfortable, while unconscious processes actually drive most behavior. Studies repeatedly show that people confidently explain their choices with reasons that cannot possibly be true. Our sense of being consistent, rational actors is largely a story we tell ourselves to feel in control. Part 18. The Narrowing Path. With each major life decision, countless potential futures disappear forever, narrowing your possible paths. The career chosen eliminates countless others. The partner selected closes doors to other relationships. Each year that passes makes certain dreams biologically, financially, or practically impossible to achieve. The specialization required for success in modern society forces abandonment of most interests and talents. The longer you walk a particular life path, the more difficult and costly changing direction becomes. By midlife, many feel locked into trajectories they would not choose again if starting over. The weight of previous decisions, mortgage, children, career advancement, makes radical change seem increasingly impossible. We comfort ourselves by saying, "I can always change later," while the window for certain changes quietly closes. Part 19. The Burden of Knowledge. Medical professionals know too much about how bodies fail to enjoy perfect health without anxiety. Police officers and emergency workers see too much human cruelty to maintain optimistic views of humanity. Parents of disabled children know that the normal milestones others celebrate are not guaranteed to anyone. Those who work with the dying understand that peaceful ends are rare and suffering is common. Ecological scientists watch destruction they cannot prevent while carrying the weight of understanding what is being lost. Certain knowledge changes you in ways that separate you from those who don't share your understanding. Some truths, once learned, cannot be unlearned, creating a burden carried silently among those who know. There are things specialists in every field wish they could forget, but cannot. Part 20. The Illusion of Fairness. We teach children that goodness is rewarded and badness punished, knowing this is often untrue. Virtuous behaviors frequently go unrecognized, while harmful actions bring wealth, power, and admiration. Countless acts of kindness and sacrifice happen daily with no acknowledgement or reward for those performing them. Hard work and talent alone rarely guarantee success without the additional factors of luck and privilege. Some people suffer immensely despite living exemplary lives, while others prosper, despite causing harm. The belief in ultimate justice, either through karma, divine judgment, or social consequences, rarely matches observable reality. We maintain the fiction of fairness, because the alternative, that suffering and reward are often random, feels too threatening. The most comforting stories we tell ourselves are often the furthest from the truth we observe. Part 21. Impermanent Beauty. Everything beautiful is already in the process of decay, changing, aging, or disappearing from the moment we notice it. The sunset that moves you is already ending, the flower already wilting, the child already growing older. Our awareness of beauty is often heightened precisely because we sense its impermanence. The face you see in the mirror today will never look exactly this way again, changing imperceptibly each day. Ancient buildings and artifacts we treasure are slowly disintegrating despite our best preservation efforts. Digital photographs and recordings we make to preserve moments deteriorate or become technologically inaccessible. Even the most carefully preserved art will eventually crumble to dust as entropy claims everything physical. Our attempts to hold on to beauty often prevent us from fully experiencing it in the fleeting moment it exists. Part 22. The Comfort of Lies. Most relationships depend on mutual agreement not to speak certain truths that would damage the connection. Parents maintain fictions about equal love for all children despite having favorites they never acknowledge. Partners allow each other face-saving delusions about personal failings, physical changes and disappointed expectations. Friends overlook flaws and pretend to admire qualities they privately find annoying or off-putting. Most people would be devastated to hear completely honest assessments from those closest to them. We claim to value honesty while depending on strategic dishonesty to maintain most relationships. The truths we withhold from others are often matched by the truths we hide from ourselves about our own motives. Complete honesty would destroy most relationships, suggesting truth may be less valuable than we pretend. Part 23. The Privilege of Ignorance. Most people remain blissfully unaware of the suffering required to maintain their comfortable lifestyles. We prefer not to know about the working conditions behind the products we purchase and enjoy daily. Environmental degradation happens far from where most consumers live, allowing destruction to continue unseen. The violence required to secure resources and maintain global power structures remains invisible to beneficiaries. Medical comforts depend on animal testing and experimentation that most would find disturbing to witness. The convenience of not knowing allows continuation of systems that would be rejected if fully understood. When confronted with these realities, most people feel briefly troubled before returning to comfortable ignorance. The ability to look away from others' suffering represents one of the greatest privileges of the fortunate. Part 24. The Erosion of Self. The brain begins deteriorating in our 20s, losing cells and connections that will never be replaced. Cognitive abilities peak early and begin a slow decline most people notice only in retrospect. Memories you consider essential to your identity are gradually fading, changing, or disappearing entirely. The sharp clarity of youthful thinking gives way to processing that is slower but not necessarily wiser. Many older adults fail to recognize how significantly their cognitive abilities have declined over decades. The self you consider stable and continuing is actually constantly being revised and reconstructed. The person you were at 20 no longer exists, except in deteriorating memories that grow less accurate with time. The you that exists now is merely the current iteration in a series of selves connected by a fragile narrative. Part 25. Unnatural Selection. The traits most rewarded in modern society are often disconnected from what creates genuine well-being or survival value. The ability to manipulate others, self-promote, and appear confident often outweighs actual competence. We select leaders based on charisma rather than wisdom, creating systems that perpetuate harmful patterns. Our attraction to novelty and sensationalism rewards those who create outrage rather than understanding. Educational systems reward compliance and test performance over creativity and critical thinking. The qualities most celebrated in public figures are often precisely those that create suffering in private relationships. Economies reward extraction and exploitation over sustainability and genuine value creation. These misaligned incentives create societies that systematically undermine the very happiness they claim to pursue. Part 26. False Understanding. Most explanations we accept for complex phenomena represent dramatic oversimplifications that create an illusion of comprehension, while fundamentally misrepresenting how systems actually function. The narratives in history books and documentaries represent politically acceptable interpretations and simplified storylines rather than the messy, contradictory, and often random factors that actually determined historical outcomes. Scientific findings reported in popular media are routinely oversimplified to the point of misrepresenting the actual research, creating public knowledge that researchers themselves would not recognize as accurate representations of their work. Political and economic systems involve such complex feedback loops, emergent properties, and interdependencies that no single person, including supposed experts, can truly comprehend them, despite confident predictions and explanations that suggest otherwise. The human brain evolved primarily to create satisfying narratives and identify agency rather than to perceive reality accurately, prioritizing coherent stories over messy truth when the two conflict. We habitually mistake our mental models of reality for reality itself, forgetting they are merely approximations and heuristics rather than direct perception of how things actually work. The subjective sense of understanding complex topics often arrives precisely when we've oversimplified them enough to feel intellectually comfortable, mistaking the relief of cognitive closure for genuine comprehension. The most reliable sign of true expertise in any field is often an increasing awareness of how much remains unknown or uncertain, with intellectual humility growing rather than diminishing as knowledge deepens beyond superficial understanding. Part 27. The Constraints of Language. The most profound human experiences consistently lie beyond the capacity of language to express them, creating an unbridgeable gap between lived experience and our ability to communicate it to others. Words create a comforting illusion of shared understanding, while actual experiences remain fundamentally private and incommunicable, approximated through metaphor and description, but never fully conveyed regardless of eloquence. The limits of your vocabulary literally constrain what thoughts you can formulate clearly and share with others, creating boundaries to consciousness itself determined by linguistic tools available in languages you happen to speak. Different languages enable fundamentally different perceptions and cognitions of reality through their grammatical structures, available distinctions, and conceptual frameworks, creating worldviews that cannot be perfectly translated between linguistic systems. The most important truths in human experience about love, consciousness, suffering, meaning, or beauty are precisely those that words most dramatically fail to capture adequately, creating a painful gap between understanding and expression. We frequently mistake the map of language for the territory of experience, believing we've shared something when we've merely exchanged symbols that point toward experiences that remain fundamentally private and unique. Two people can use identical words while meaning entirely different things based on their unique experiential references, creating an illusion of connection while actually talking past each other despite apparent agreement. The fundamental loneliness of human existence stems partly from this inherent limitation of language. Our primary tool for connection fails precisely when we most need it to bridge the gap between separate consciousnesses. Part 28. The Fiction of Consistency. The sense of being a single, coherent person with consistent traits, beliefs and values across time represents a narrative fiction maintained through selective attention and memory rather than reflecting psychological reality. Most people simultaneously hold numerous contradictory beliefs and values that would create cognitive dissonance if examined together, but compartmentalization and context-dependent activation allow these contradictions to coexist without awareness. Your personality changes significantly in different contexts, with family versus friends versus authority figures versus romantic partners, each version experienced as authentic in the moment, despite their sometimes dramatic differences in expressed traits and values. The principles and certainties you currently consider core to your identity have likely changed substantially several times throughout your life already, with past versions of yourself holding equally strong convictions about beliefs you now reject completely. Your past self would likely be unrecognizable or even objectionable to your current self if you could actually meet across time, holding values, dreams and beliefs that might now seem naive, misguided, or even reprehensible from your current perspective. The stories you tell about your motivations and reasons are often post hoc justifications for behaviors and choices driven by unconscious processes, social pressures or situational factors you either cannot access or prefer not to acknowledge. Psychological research consistently demonstrates there is no single, authentic you waiting to be discovered. Only temporary configurations of traits, tendencies and beliefs activated by specific situations and relationship contexts. The narrative continuity we maintain through life stories and identity claims masks the fundamental discontinuity of consciousness and selfhood, creating an illusion of consistency that provides psychological comfort but poor predictive value about our actual behavior across contexts. Part 29. The Myth of Arrival. We persistently pursue goals believing their achievement will bring lasting satisfaction, only to discover upon reaching them that accomplishment creates temporary pleasure, quickly replaced by emptiness and new striving. The promotion, relationship milestone, recognition or acquisition longed for changes nothing fundamental about our condition once obtained, providing brief satisfaction before becoming the new normal from which further desires emerge. The hedonic treadmill quickly resets expectations after each achievement, returning us to baseline happiness or dissatisfaction levels, regardless of objective improvements in circumstances or accomplishments. Material acquisitions that required years of effort and anticipation typically transform from exciting possessions to unnoticed background elements of daily life within weeks or months, their emotional impact fading far more quickly than anticipated. Each milestone achieved simply reveals the next horizon of desire, creating an endless cycle of striving in which fulfillment remains perpetually just beyond reach, despite continuous achievement and acquisition. The "I'll be happy when" mindset ensures happiness remains perpetually located in the future rather than the present, creating a lifetime of striving without arrival at the contentment we imagine awaits after just one more accomplishment. Even dramatic life changes that required years of effort, moving countries, changing careers, finding love, starting a family, eventually become the unremarkable backdrop of daily experience rather than sources of ongoing fulfillment or excitement. The anticipated arrival at some final state of contentment, once certain conditions are met, represents perhaps the most persistent and self-defeating human delusion, one that each generation discovers anew, despite its predictable disappointment. Part 30. The weight of choice. The freedom to choose in modern life often creates anxiety rather than happiness. Each decision carries the burden of responsibility for outcomes and regret for paths not taken. Studies show that too many options often lead to decision paralysis or decreased satisfaction with choices made. The constant pressure to optimize every decision, from careers to breakfast cereals, creates endless second-guessing. We are haunted by the imagined perfect choices we might have made with perfect information. Social media shows us countless alternative lives we could be living, increasing dissatisfaction with our actual lives. Many people secretly long for simpler times, with fewer choices but clearer paths and expectations. The burden of creating a meaningful life through conscious choice is heavier than most acknowledge. Part 31. The Audience Effect. Much of what we do is performed for an imaginary audience that exists mainly in our minds. We curate social media personas for viewers who rarely notice or care about our carefully crafted images. The embarrassing moments we obsess over are quickly forgotten by everyone except ourselves. Most people are too concerned with their own performance to pay close attention to yours. The harsh inner critic that evaluates your every action speaks in a voice only you can hear. We imagine others judging us far more harshly and frequently than they actually do. Hours spent perfecting details often go completely unnoticed by the very people meant to appreciate them. The freedom that comes with realizing how little others think about us is both liberating and lonely. Part 32. The Reality of Randomness. Lives are shaped by random events far more than by careful planning or personal merit. Being born in a particular time, place and family determines more of your outcome than your choices ever will. Successful people rarely acknowledge how much of their achievement depended on fortunate timing and circumstances. A single random encounter, accident or opportunity often changes life trajectories completely. Identical efforts produce wildly different results based on factors entirely outside individual control. The comforting belief in meritocracy persists despite overwhelming evidence that luck plays the dominant role. Our need to believe in causality and justice makes accepting the role of randomness deeply uncomfortable. The randomness of suffering and reward undermines most conventional moral frameworks and life philosophies. Part 33. The Limitations of Empathy. True empathy, across significant differences in experience, may be impossible rather than merely difficult. We can never truly know what it is like to be another person, despite our best efforts at understanding. Our attempts to imagine others' experiences are limited by our own perceptual and conceptual frameworks. The claim to understand another's suffering can sometimes minimize rather than honor their unique experience. Empathy tends to flow more easily toward those who resemble us, creating systematic blind spots. The mind's natural tendency is to project its own experiences rather than truly perceive others' realities. Our capacity for empathy is further limited by attention spans and emotional bandwidth. The ideal of universal empathy may be noble but remains fundamentally unachievable given human limitations. Part 34. The Self-Deception of Memory. Your most confident memories are often the least reliable, particularly those with strong emotional content. Studies repeatedly show that eyewitness testimony, though given with certainty, is frequently wrong in critical details. The stories you tell about your past are continuously edited to maintain your current self-image. Memories of trauma are particularly subject to distortion, fragmentation, or complete repression. We remember our own virtuous actions and others' flaws, while forgetting evidence that contradicts these narratives. The certainty with which a memory is held has almost no correlation with its accuracy. Even flashbulb memories of significant events show substantial inaccuracies when checked against records. The self constructed from these unreliable memories stands on a foundation of creative fiction rather than fact. Part 35. The Opacity of Others. We never truly know the people closest to us, despite years or decades of intimate connection. Even long-term partners keep thoughts, feelings, fantasies and regrets hidden from each other. Children conceal significant aspects of their lives from parents who believe they know them completely. Friends present carefully edited versions of themselves, revealing different facets to different people. The internal experiences of others remain fundamentally inaccessible, regardless of their attempts to describe them. Most people maintain private thoughts they will never share with anyone, taking them to the grave. The person you think you know best might be the one who has most successfully hidden their true self from you. Complete transparency would likely make most relationships impossible rather than more authentic. Part 36. The Persistence of Suffering. Despite technological progress, the fundamental sources of human suffering remain unchanged for millennia. Loneliness, rejection, loss, jealousy, and fear trouble us exactly as they troubled our ancestors. Modern conveniences have eliminated many physical hardships while creating new psychological ones. Social media connects us while creating unprecedented opportunities for comparison and inadequacy. Medical advances extend lives without necessarily improving their quality or meaning. Wealth and comfort often fail to provide the happiness they promise, creating new forms of emptiness. The suffering that comes from being a conscious, mortal being cannot be eliminated by external progress. Each generation discovers anew that material solutions cannot resolve the essential human predicament. Part 37. The Fragility of Identity. Your sense of self can be dramatically altered by seemingly minor physical or chemical changes. A small brain injury, hormone imbalance, or medication can transform personality, values, and capabilities. The continuity of identity you take for granted depends entirely on the fragile consistency of your brain's functioning. Conditions like dementia reveal how the self can unravel when memory and cognition deteriorate. What you consider essential to your identity, beliefs, preferences, memories, can change radically with brain alterations. The illusion of a stable self persists, despite evidence that we are constantly changing physically and mentally. The boundary between you and not you is far less clear than everyday experience suggests. The self you defend so vigorously is ultimately as fragile as the tissue that creates it. Part 38. The Cost of Civilization. The comforts of modern life have been purchased at the price of connection to natural rhythms and processes. We live increasingly disconnected from the sources of our food, water, energy and material goods. The convenience of urban life separates us from the cycles of seasons, weather and wildlife. Most modern humans rarely experience true darkness, silence or wilderness. Skills that sustained humans for millennia, growing food, making shelter, finding water, are now specialized knowledge. The autonomy and resilience that characterized human communities has been traded for efficiency and convenience. Few people could survive if the complex systems supporting modern life were to suddenly disappear. Our dependence on these systems creates a vulnerability unknown to our more self-sufficient ancestors. Part 39. The Inevitability of Loss. To love anything or anyone is to guarantee eventual loss and grief. Every meaningful connection we form will end through death, change, or separation. The deeper the love, the more profound the pain when it is broken by loss. Parents who deeply love their children must eventually watch them suffer in ways they cannot prevent. The places that formed us change or disappear, becoming accessible only through increasingly unreliable memory. Objects imbued with emotional significance break, wear out, or are lost, taking pieces of our history with them. The capacity to love despite knowing it ends in loss may be the greatest human courage. Our attempts to protect ourselves from this inevitable pain often prevent us from fully living. Part 40. The Limitations of Justice. True justice may be impossible to achieve in a world of limited information and perspective. Legal systems can at best approximate justice through standardized procedures, not deliver it perfectly. Most harms people suffer will never be acknowledged, compensated, or balanced by any form of justice. The deepest wounds often come from actions that break no law but violate trust or relationship. Systemic injustices persist partly because they benefit those with power to address them. The people who suffer most from injustice typically have the least power to remedy it. Justice delayed is indeed justice denied, yet most justice processes extend suffering through their length. The ideal of perfect justice remains perpetually beyond human reach, despite its central place in our moral imagination. Part 41. The Comfort of Objects. Many people form deeper attachments to possessions than to people in their lives. Objects provide predictable comfort without the demands, disappointments, or betrayals of human relationships. The collection and arrangement of things creates an illusion of control in an unpredictable world. Possessions can become physical anchors for memories and identity when relationships prove unstable. The pursuit of perfect objects, homes, cars, technologies, often substitutes for addressing emotional emptiness. Our culture encourages treating material goods as solutions to non-material problems. The temporary pleasure of acquisition fades quickly, creating a cycle of perpetual wanting. Many people approach death surrounded by carefully curated possessions that meant everything to them and nothing to their heirs. Part 42. The Myth of Closure. The clean emotional resolution we call closure rarely arrives in the way we expect. Some wounds heal partially but continue to ache when the weather changes, literally or metaphorically. Traumatic experiences are integrated rather than resolved, becoming part of our ongoing story. The expectation of neat closure can prevent acceptance of messy, incomplete healing processes. Relationships often end without clear explanation, leaving questions that will never be answered. The rituals we create to mark endings provide structure, but not the emotional completion we seek. Some betrayals and losses will trouble us until our dying day, resistant to every attempt at resolution. The most profound grief doesn't end, but transforms, becoming a different shape of absence over time. Part 43. The Poverty of Attention. Our capacity for sustained attention diminishes as demands for it multiply exponentially. The ability to sit with a single thought, book, or conversation without distraction becomes increasingly rare. Digital technologies systematically harvest attention, the scarcest and most valuable human resource. The constant switching between tasks and stimuli erodes the deep processing needed for wisdom and insight. Children developing now may never experience the quality of attention their grandparents took for granted. The loss of contemplative space changes not just what we think about, but how we are capable of thinking. Brief, fragmented attention creates brief, fragmented understanding of complex issues and people. The capacity for sustained attention may become the defining divide between different types of minds and abilities. Part 44. The Unowned Shadow. Each person carries disowned aspects of themselves that they project onto others rather than recognize. The qualities we most despise in others often reflect what we cannot accept in ourselves. The righteous certainty with which we condemn others' failings often masks our own similar tendencies. Our harshest judgments reveal more about our fears than about those we judge. The energy devoted to identifying others' flaws often serves to distract from painful self-awareness. Entire political and social movements can function as collective projection of unacknowledged shadows. True self-knowledge requires facing precisely those qualities we most want to disown or deny. The shadow grows more powerful and problematic the more completely it remains unconscious. Part 45. The Loneliness of Leadership. Those in positions of responsibility often experience profound isolation they cannot share with others. Leaders must make decisions affecting many lives while bearing the weight of uncertainty alone. The person everyone turns to for guidance often has no one to turn to for their own support. Parents, executives, and community leaders alike carry burdens they cannot fully explain to those who depend on them. The appearance of confidence must be maintained even when doubt or fear is overwhelming internally. Those who follow rarely understand the cost of leadership on those who bear its responsibilities. The higher one rises in any hierarchy, the fewer true peers remain with whom experiences can be honestly shared. The loneliness of leadership represents a cost rarely acknowledged in discussions of power and authority. Part 46. The Illusion of Understanding. We navigate a world far more complex than our minds evolved to comprehend. The patterns and causes we perceive are often simplifications our brains create to manage overwhelming complexity. Most explanations for why things happen represent post hoc narratives rather than accurate causal models. The feeling of understanding often comes precisely when we've oversimplified enough to feel comfortable. Even experts in narrow fields can rarely predict outcomes in complex systems with reliable accuracy. Our conviction that we understand tends to increase with distance from actual knowledge of a subject. The maps we use to navigate reality, mental models, theories, beliefs, are always dramatic simplifications. True wisdom may lie in embracing the limitations of human understanding rather than denying them. Part 47. The End of Wonder. As we age, the capacity for genuine wonder and awe diminishes for most people. The fresh perception that makes childhood magical gradually fades into habitual seeing and categorizing. Knowledge and explanation, while valuable, often replace the direct experience of mystery and wonder. The world becomes increasingly familiar, mapped and expected, rather than surprising and marvelous. Professional expertise can narrow perception to focus only on what is relevant to known frameworks. The beginner's mind, open to possibility and amazement, becomes increasingly difficult to access. Many adults experience wonder only during rare moments of disruption to normal perception. The loss of wonder represents an unacknowledged grief in the transition from childhood to adulthood. Part 48. The Unequal Distribution of Time. Time, the one resource distributed equally to all, is experienced very differently across social divides. The poor spend more time waiting for transportation, in government offices, in medical settings than the wealthy. Some must trade most of their waking hours for basic survival, while others have freedom to allocate time. The stress of poverty, discrimination and insecurity accelerates physical aging and shortens actual lifespan. Leisure, rest and contemplation remain luxury goods inaccessible to many despite technological advances. The ability to control one's time represents perhaps the most significant yet overlooked form of privilege. Modern life has created time poverty alongside material abundance for many in developed economies. The promise that technology would create more leisure time has proved false for most working people. Part 49. The Persistence of Childhood. The wounded or neglected child you once were continues to influence your adult decisions and reactions. Emotional patterns established before age 7 often determine relationship choices throughout life. The voices of early caregivers continue as internal dialogue long after those people are gone. Unconscious recreation of familiar childhood dynamics drives choices that appear irrational on the surface. The need for validation or security not received in childhood can motivate entire career paths or life choices. Patterns of attachment formed in infancy often predict adult relationship satisfaction and stability. Even those who consciously reject their upbringing often find themselves unconsciously repeating its patterns. The child you were and the adult you are exist simultaneously, influencing each other across time. Part 50. The Limits of Healing. Not all wounds heal completely, despite therapy, time, understanding or forgiveness. Some traumas change brain structure and function in ways that remain for a lifetime. Integration and management of pain often represent more realistic goals than elimination of suffering. The expectation of complete healing can become another burden for those already carrying heavy loads. Some losses create absences that cannot be filled, but must be carried with increasing strength. The wisdom gained through suffering rarely feels worth the price paid to acquire it. The most profound growth often comes not from healing completely, but from learning to live meaningfully with wounds. Perhaps wholeness includes acknowledging brokenness rather than overcoming it entirely. Part 51. The Unheard Voice. Many people will go their entire lives without ever feeling truly heard or understood by another human being, despite countless conversations and relationships. They speak their deepest truths, but find others responding to projections or assumptions rather than what was actually expressed. The painful experience of vulnerably sharing your innermost thoughts, only to have them misinterpreted or dismissed, creates a profound existential loneliness that accumulates over decades. Some eventually stop trying to articulate their authentic experience after years of being misunderstood, retreating into a private inner world. Even in our most intimate relationships, people often listen through filters of their own needs, histories, and cognitive biases, hearing what confirms their existing view rather than the novel reality being shared. The gap between what we intend to communicate and what others actually receive can feel increasingly unbridgeable as we age and experience repeated failures of understanding. This fundamental failure of human communication leads many to the devastating conclusion that true connection is impossible rather than merely difficult, prompting withdrawal from authentic interaction. The primal need to be witnessed and truly understood remains painfully unmet, even among those surrounded by family, friends and colleagues who sincerely believe they know and understand them. Part 52. The Burden of Knowledge. The more conscious you become of the suffering and injustice in the world, the heavier the weight you must carry through everyday life, while others walk unburdened. Knowledge about climate change, systemic discrimination, political corruption, and humanitarian crises cannot be compartmentalized once truly comprehended. Those most sensitive to the pain of others often find themselves overwhelmed by seemingly simple activities like shopping, where they see the hidden costs of each product in human exploitation and environmental damage. Awareness of complex systemic problems frequently leads to feelings of helplessness and despair rather than empowerment, as the scale of issues dwarfs individual capacity for meaningful action. Learning about the true history of colonization, genocide, slavery, and ongoing oppression permanently alters how one perceives current institutions, wealth distributions, and power structures that others take for granted. The blissful comfort of ignorance becomes forever impossible once certain thresholds of knowledge have been crossed, closing the door to simple enjoyments and uncomplicated patriotism. This heightened awareness inevitably separates you from family, friends, and colleagues who maintain comfortable illusions about meritocracy, progress, and justice, creating another form of profound isolation. The fundamental question becomes not whether to carry this knowledge, but how to bear its weight without being crushed by it or becoming numb to the very suffering that awakened your conscience. Part 53. The Futility of Advice. Most advice given reflects the giver's personal regrets, unprocessed pain, and limited life experience rather than an accurate assessment of the receiver's actual situation, personality, or needs. People confidently prescribe one-size-fits-all solutions based on anecdotal evidence and limited understanding of others' complex circumstances, cultural backgrounds, and available resources. The specific context, personality traits, privilege, timing, and support systems that made a solution work for one person are rarely transferable to another's situation, rendering most advice practically useless. Well-meaning guidance often serves primarily to make the giver feel wise, helpful, and in control, rather than to actually address the nuanced challenges facing the person supposedly being helped. The most valuable insights typically come through direct personal experience, trial and error, and natural consequences rather than through others' instructions, warnings, or second-hand wisdom. Each person must ultimately discover their own truths through lived experience and reflection, regardless of how much guidance they receive or how accurate that guidance might actually be. The painful irony is that by the time we truly understand something important about life, those who might benefit from our knowledge are usually unwilling or unable to truly hear it, continuing the cycle of each generation repeating similar mistakes. This creates a tragic situation where human wisdom accumulates individually but transfers between people and generations with tremendous inefficiency and loss, forcing the same painful lessons to be relearned repeatedly. Part 54. The Illusion of Specialness. Despite our deep conviction of personal uniqueness, most of our thoughts, feelings, desires, and life trajectories follow predictable patterns shared by millions of others. The belief that our suffering, love, creativity, or insight is somehow exceptional provides comfort while blinding us to our profound commonality with others. Parents gaze at their newborns, believing them exceptional and destined for greatness, when statistically most children will live ordinary lives facing the same challenges as countless others. Our most private thoughts and secret desires, which we believe make us unique or perhaps deviant, are experienced by millions of others who similarly keep them hidden. The personal narratives we construct to explain our life choices often disguise how our decisions are shaped by cultural scripts, economic forces, and biological imperatives beyond our awareness. The modern emphasis on individual specialness creates unrealistic expectations that leave many feeling they have failed when they live ordinary lives. Even those who achieve recognition in their field are quickly replaced and forgotten, their supposedly unique contribution absorbed into collective knowledge or fashion. The painful truth is that the universe continues essentially unchanged by the absence of even the most accomplished human beings, a fact our ego defenses work tirelessly to help us avoid confronting. Part 55. The Myth of Deserving. The deeply held belief that we somehow deserve either our fortune or misfortune is perhaps the most persistent and dangerous illusion in human thinking. Children born into poverty, abuse, or war zones have done nothing to deserve their suffering, yet must endure it while others experience safety and abundance. Those born to wealth, stable families, and peaceful nations enjoy advantages they did nothing to earn, yet often believe their subsequent success stems solely from personal merit and effort. The cancer patient did nothing to deserve their illness, nor did the healthy person earn their good health through virtue or correct living, despite our desperate attempts to identify causes. Our need to believe in a just world where good things happen to good people leads us to blame victims and attribute success to character rather than circumstance or random chance. This comforting fiction allows the fortunate to enjoy their advantages without guilt, and provides the illusion that misfortune can be avoided through proper behavior or attitude. The concept of deserving implies a cosmic accounting system that simply does not exist, yet we cling to this belief rather than face the terrifying randomness of fate and the unearned nature of both privilege and suffering. Releasing this myth would require fundamentally reimagining social systems built on the assumption that wealth and position reflect merit rather than circumstance, an undertaking few beneficiaries of the current system are willing to contemplate. Part 56. The Tragedy of Timing. Many potentially beautiful relationships, opportunities, and creative collaborations never materialize simply because the timing is wrong, with people meeting at incompatible stages of life or readiness. The perfect mentor appears when we're too inexperienced to recognize their value, or the ideal romantic partner enters our life when circumstances make connection impossible. Opportunities for career advancement, artistic expression, or personal growth often arrive when we lack the confidence, resources, or freedom to pursue them, never to return when we finally become ready. Parents often finally develop the wisdom, patience, and emotional maturity needed for skillful parenting only after their children have grown and left home. The experiences that would have transformed our understanding in youth arrive only in middle or old age, when established patterns are difficult to change, and fewer years remain to implement new insights. Two people perfectly suited for each other cross paths when one or both are committed elsewhere, creating a lifetime of wondering what might have been. The insights that would have healed childhood wounds often come too late to repair damaged relationships with parents who have died, or siblings who have become estranged. This misalignment of timing and readiness creates countless invisible tragedies of unrealized potential and connection, with most people experiencing many near misses of profound significance without ever becoming aware of what almost was. Part 57. The Unknowable Impact. Our actions and words affect others in ways we can never fully know or understand, creating ripple effects that continue long after we've forgotten the encounter. A casual criticism might wound deeply and change someone's life trajectory, while an offhand compliment might provide crucial encouragement at exactly the right moment. Parents make countless decisions that profoundly shape their children's development and future possibilities without knowing which choices matter most or how they'll ultimately influence outcomes. Teachers, mentors and managers affect hundreds or thousands of lives without receiving feedback about their long-term impact, positive or negative, on those they briefly guided. The stranger you were rude to during a bad day might carry that interaction for years, just as someone else might remember your small kindness as a pivotal moment that restored their faith in humanity. Most of us will never know about the person who decided not to end their life because of our simple acknowledgement, or the child who developed a lifelong interest because of something we casually shared. This fundamental unknowability of our impact makes it impossible to accurately assess the value or meaning of our lives and actions, leaving us forever uncertain about whether we've helped or harmed more on balance. The most significant effects of our existence may be completely invisible to us, while the achievements we pride ourselves on might ultimately matter little in the grand scheme of things. Part 58. The Prison of Perception. Each of us lives trapped within our own perceptual system, never able to experience reality directly, but only through the heavily filtered and constructed model our brain creates. What we perceive as solid matter is mostly empty space. Colours exist only in our neural processing rather than in the world, and our senses detect only a tiny fraction of existing stimuli. Two people in the same situation literally experience different realities based on their sensory processing, attention, past experiences and cognitive frameworks. We navigate not the world itself but our brain's model of it, a simulation so convincing we mistake it for direct perception of objective reality. Cultural and linguistic frameworks further shape what we can notice, describe or consider important, creating perceptual worlds as different as the languages that help structure them. The limits of our sensory and cognitive systems create boundaries to understanding that no amount of education or effort can fully transcend. Even our most fundamental experiences of consciousness, time and causality may be constructions rather than direct perceptions of how reality actually operates. This biological prison of perception means we can never know what it is like to be another person or creature, nor can we ever access reality except through our species, specific and individually unique filters. Part 59. The Cost of Protection. The psychological defenses we develop to protect ourselves from pain often become the very barriers that prevent us from experiencing love, connection and growth. Walls built in childhood to shield us from rejection or abandonment remain standing in adulthood, keeping out not just potential harm but also potential intimacy. The emotional numbness that helped survive trauma becomes an inability to feel joy. The skepticism that prevented exploitation becomes cynicism that sees ulterior motives everywhere. Defense mechanisms that served valuable purposes during difficult times become outdated but persist through habit, preventing experiences that might heal the original wounds. Self-protective behaviors that seem rational in isolation create patterns that systematically undermine the very happiness and security they aim to preserve. The armor we construct piece by piece over years becomes so familiar we mistake it for our actual self, defending our limitations as though they were integral to our identity. The cruel irony is that our most destructive patterns often began as creative solutions to impossible situations, adaptive responses that outlived their usefulness but continue to operate on autopilot. We become the primary authors of our own unhappiness, unconsciously making choices that reinforce familiar pain while avoiding unfamiliar growth, all in the name of keeping ourselves safe from harm. Part 60. The Mirage of Understanding. The sense of comprehending complex phenomena, from climate systems to economies to human behavior, is often an illusion created by oversimplification and pattern-seeking. Our brains evolved to create coherent narratives rather than to perceive statistical relationships or complex systemic interactions accurately. The explanations that feel most satisfying and complete are frequently those that most dramatically distort reality by reducing complexity to simple causes and effects. Even supposed experts in complex fields have been repeatedly shown to perform worse than simple algorithms when making predictions, despite their confidence in their sophisticated understanding. The more certain someone appears about the causes of complex events or the future of complex systems, the more likely they are oversimplifying to the point of fundamental misunderstanding. We confuse familiarity with comprehension, believing we understand phenomena we can name and discuss without grasping their deeper mechanics. This illusion of understanding leads to dangerous overconfidence in addressing complex societal problems, ecological challenges, and economic systems, with interventions often creating unanticipated negative consequences. Perhaps true wisdom begins with acknowledging the profound limits of human comprehension, rather than pretending we can fully understand systems that exceed our cognitive capacities. Part 61. The Blindness of Privilege. Those with the greatest advantages in society are typically the least able to perceive the systemic forces that benefit them, mistaking structural privilege for personal merit. The most fortunate believe they see the world clearly while being blind to the invisible systems of support that have shaped their opportunities since birth. People born into stable families, safe neighborhoods, and strong educational systems rarely recognize how these foundations, unavailable to many, create the platform for their achievements. The absence of obstacles is itself a profound advantage that remains largely invisible to those who have never had to overcome systematic barriers based on their identity or background. Those who have never faced discrimination struggle to believe the lived experiences of those who encounter it regularly, dismissing well-documented patterns as isolated incidents or misinterpretations. The comfortable assumption that the world is largely fair and meritocratic serves to justify existing hierarchies and absolve the privileged from examining their unearned advantages. This blindness is not a moral failing, but a cognitive limitation. We naturally normalize our own experience and struggle to truly comprehend realities we haven't personally encountered. Perhaps the most pernicious aspect of privilege is how it obscures itself from its beneficiaries, making genuine understanding across social divides one of the most difficult forms of human comprehension. Part 62. The Limits of Language. The thoughts we can think and the experiences we can share are fundamentally constrained by the languages available to us, creating boundaries to consciousness itself. Certain emotions, relationships, and experiences remain unnamed in English, yet have specific words in other languages, suggesting gaps in our conceptual framework rather than in human experience. The most profound human experiences, intense grief, spiritual awakening, the birth of a child, often leave us speechless precisely because they exceed what our linguistic tools can adequately capture or convey. Different languages enable different perceptions of time, space, causality, and personhood, creating worldviews that cannot be perfectly translated between cultural linguistic systems. The limits of vocabulary literally constrain the thoughts you can formulate clearly. while concepts lacking precise terms remain fuzzy and difficult to examine or discuss. We mistake our linguistic maps for the territories they represent, forgetting that words are merely imperfect symbols pointing toward experiences they can never fully contain. Two people using identical words often mean entirely different things, creating an illusion of understanding while actual miscommunication remains hidden until consequences emerge. The fundamental inadequacy of language to fully capture human experience creates an inescapable solitude. We can approximate sharing our inner worlds, but never achieve complete transmission of meaning. Part 63. The Erosion of Meaning. Activities and achievements that once seemed deeply meaningful often hollow out over time, leaving people questioning the purpose of even their most significant life investments. Career paths pursued with passion and conviction for decades can suddenly appear pointless or even harmful when viewed from a different stage of life or perspective. Religious and ideological frameworks that provided structure and certainty frequently collapse under the weight of lived experience, leaving former believers disoriented in a world without clear moral coordinates. Relationships entered with complete devotion sometimes deteriorate into formal arrangements, maintained for practical reasons rather than love or connection. The subjective sense of meaning is neurologically similar to other forms of pleasure that inevitably diminish with repetition and familiarity, requiring ever-new sources of significance. Accomplishments that were supposed to provide lasting satisfaction, publishing a book, reaching a financial goal, raising children, often deliver only temporary fulfillment before new voids appear. This pattern creates a crisis in midlife or later years when many people realize they've organized their lives around pursuits that no longer feel meaningful but have limited time or energy to begin anew. Perhaps meaning itself is not something to be found and permanently secured, but rather a temporary state that must be repeatedly recreated throughout life as we and our circumstances evolve. Part 64. The Weight of Potential. The burden of unrealized potential can become heavier than actual failure, haunting those who sense their capabilities but never fully express or develop them. Many highly intelligent or creative people live with constant awareness of the gap between what they could achieve and what they actually accomplish, creating ongoing internal dissatisfaction. Parents often unconsciously transfer their unfulfilled dreams to children, creating expectations that distort natural development and create lifelong striving to fulfill someone else's abandoned potential. The early identification of talent or giftedness frequently becomes a psychological burden rather than an advantage, creating performance pressure and fear of disappointing others' expectations. Those who show early promise but don't achieve conventional success often suffer more than those who never demonstrated special abilities, carrying a sense of having squandered something precious. The paths not taken, careers unexplored, creative pursuits abandoned, relationships not cultivated, can create a shadow life that competes with actual experience for emotional attention. Most painful is the recognition, usually coming in middle age, that certain potentials can no longer be realized due to physical limitations, family responsibilities, or simple lack of remaining time. The question of whether we have lived up to our potential becomes increasingly poignant as opportunities narrow with age, creating regret, not for actions taken but for capabilities left unexpressed. Part 65. The Permanence of Damage. Some wounds never fully heal, no matter how much therapy, time, forgiveness or understanding we apply to them. Childhood trauma literally reshapes developing brains, creating neural pathways and stress responses that persist throughout life despite conscious awareness and effort. Certain betrayals permanently alter our capacity for trust, not because we haven't processed or forgiven, but because the learning has been physiologically encoded as protective adaptation. The recognition that some damage is permanent contradicts cultural narratives about complete healing and transformation, creating another layer of isolation for those carrying lasting injuries. Physical trauma, like brain injuries, chronic illness, or sexual violence, can create permanent changes to the body that psychological healing cannot fully address or reverse. Communities and cultures also carry multi-generational trauma that persists long after original events, shaping identities and relationships in ways that defy individual healing efforts. The expectation of complete recovery often becomes another burden for survivors, who must pretend wholeness or be judged as stuck or unwilling to heal. Perhaps true wisdom includes accepting that some experiences permanently change us, and that integration and meaning-making may be more realistic goals than returning to an unblemished state that can never be recovered. Part 66. The Theatre of Authenticity. The modern obsession with authenticity has paradoxically created new forms of performance as people carefully curate their appearance of spontaneity and genuineness. Social media profiles emphasizing living my truth often represent the most calculated and edited versions of self, designed specifically for public consumption and approval. Communities that most vocally prize authenticity frequently enforce rigid, though unacknowledged codes about what authentic expression should look like, punishing genuine difference. The commodification of authenticity turns even sincere self-expression into marketing strategy, with brands and influencers performing carefully constructed vulnerability to appear relatable. The pressure to appear authentic creates new anxieties as people constantly monitor their self-presentation for signs of perceived fakeness or conformity. Therapeutic culture's emphasis on finding and expressing one's true self assumes a stable, essential identity that contradicts psychological research on the contextual, fluid nature of personality. The quest for perfect authenticity often becomes another impossible standard that creates feelings of inadequacy, as people inevitably shift personas between different relationships and contexts. Perhaps true authenticity lies not in consistent self-expression, but in acknowledging the multiplicity of selves we all contain and the performative aspects inherent in all social interaction. Part 67. The Persistence of Evolution. Our brains and bodies evolved for survival in environments radically different from modern society, creating fundamental mismatches between our design and our current reality. Anxiety disorders largely represent appropriate responses from threat detection systems designed for predator-filled environments, not for navigating performance reviews or social media. Our powerful cravings for sugar, fat, salt and calories, now destroying our health through abundance, evolved as essential survival mechanisms during frequent periods of scarcity. Status anxiety, jealousy, and social comparison that create modern unhappiness originated as adaptive concerns about resources and reproductive access in small tribal groups. Cognitive biases that frustrate rational decision-making were once helpful heuristics for quick judgments in dangerous environments with limited information. Our attention systems designed to notice movement, novelty, and potential threats are now hijacked by technologies specifically engineered to capture and monetize these automatic responses. The evolutionary lag between our ancient architecture and modern environments creates suffering that individual willpower cannot overcome, as we fight against deep programming with conscious effort. Many modern psychological problems represent normal responses to abnormal conditions rather than individual pathologies. raising questions about adapting environments to humans rather than expecting humans to overcome their evolutionary design. Part 68. The Loneliness of Growth. Personal growth often separates us from loved ones as we evolve beyond shared beliefs, values, and patterns that previously connected us. Therapy, education, travel, or spiritual practice can create profound shifts in perspective that make previous relationships feel increasingly shallow or constrained. Family members who remain in trauma patterns or limiting belief systems may resist or resent changes that implicitly challenge the worldviews or behaviors they still maintain. The recovery from addiction, codependence, or people-pleasing necessarily involves boundary changes that restructure or end relationships built on previous dynamics. Friends who shared formative experiences may grow uncomfortable when one evolves beyond shared coping mechanisms, inside jokes, or perspectives that cemented early bonds. Partners may discover they've grown in different directions after years together, creating painful choices between authentic development and maintaining connection. The loneliest phase of growth often comes in the middle, when you've left old patterns behind but haven't yet found your new community of similarly evolved people. This isolation represents a necessary but rarely acknowledged price of personal development, creating a painful paradox where becoming more whole temporarily increases feelings of disconnection. Part 69. The Opacity of History. Our understanding of history, both personal and collective, is fundamentally distorted by missing information, narrative simplification, and self-serving biases. Family stories passed through generations systematically omit shameful episodes, complicated nuances, and perspectives unflattering to narrator or audience. National histories emphasized in educational systems carefully construct narratives that support current power structures while minimizing contradictory evidence or perspectives. The overwhelming majority of human experience throughout history goes completely unrecorded, with written accounts representing primarily the perspectives of the privileged and literate. Even modern historical records capture only a tiny fraction of actual events, filtered through the biases of those who decided what was worth documenting and preserving. Our personal memories continuously reconstruct rather than replay past events, editing details to align with our current self-concept and understanding. Historical facts we consider established can be radically altered by new information or changing interpretations, suggesting our current certainties may prove equally fluid. This fundamental unreliability of historical knowledge means our understanding of how we arrived at the present, and thus our predictions about the future, rest on foundations far shakier than we typically acknowledge. Part 70. The Isolation of Intelligence. Exceptional intelligence often creates profound social isolation, as the highly intelligent person finds few who can truly understand their thinking or share their interests. Those with IQs more than 2 standard deviations above average frequently report feeling like aliens observing human behavior without being able to fully participate in normal social connection. Gifted children learn early to hide their abilities and dumb down their vocabulary to avoid rejection, creating lifelong habits of concealment and performance of normalcy. Complex, nuanced thinking gets misinterpreted as overthinking, contrarianism, or unnecessary complexity by those who genuinely cannot perceive the additional layers visible to more intelligent minds. The highly intelligent person's attempt to explain their perspective often meets with blank incomprehension or dismissal, creating recurring experiences of fundamental disconnection. patterns, connections, implications and possibilities obvious to the highly intelligent person remain invisible to others, creating frustration on both sides of the comprehension gap. This isolation often leads to depression. As evolutionary psychology suggests, intelligence evolved primarily for social problem-solving, but now often impedes the very connection it was meant to facilitate. Perhaps the most painful aspect is being told repeatedly that one is making things too complicated, when in fact one is seeing complexity that actually exists, but remains imperceptible to others. Part 71. The acceleration of time. The subjective experience of time passing speeds up dramatically as we age, with decades seeming to pass as quickly as years once did in youth. This acceleration is not merely perception, but relates to neurological changes and the decreasing percentage each time unit represents of our total lived experience. Children's summers feel endless, while retirees find years blurring together, creating a cruel irony where time moves fastest precisely when we become most aware of its finite nature. The novelty that expands subjective time diminishes with age as experiences increasingly pattern-match to established neural pathways rather than creating new ones. This acceleration creates a mathematical tragedy. The second half of life subjectively passes more than twice as quickly as the first half, even before considering diminished energy and health. Routine and familiarity further compress subjective time, with years in the same job or relationship sometimes leaving fewer distinct memories than months of travel or new experiences. By middle age, many people experience a distressing sense that life is suddenly racing toward its conclusion after seeming nearly unlimited in youth. This acceleration means the subjective experience of aging is not linear but exponential. Each passing year feels shorter than the one before it, creating increasing urgency as the end approaches. Part 72. The unequal distribution of suffering. Suffering is distributed as unequally as wealth, with some individuals and groups bearing burdens that would crush others who never experience similar pain. Some children endure more trauma before age 10 than others will face in an entire lifetime, creating fundamentally different developmental trajectories and adult capacities. The lottery of birth determines vulnerability to war, famine, violence, discrimination and preventable disease, with no cosmic justice system ensuring equal distribution of hardship. Even within families, some members endure targeted abuse while siblings in the same household remain relatively unscathed, creating widely divergent life outcomes. Those already suffering often experience pile-on effects as initial disadvantages create cascading consequences. Poverty leads to poor nutrition, leads to health problems, leads to educational struggles, leads to limited employment. The common platitude that we all have our struggles falsely equates fundamentally different magnitudes of suffering, minimizing catastrophic burdens while elevating minor inconveniences. The capacity to bear suffering itself varies tremendously between individuals based on genetics, early attachment and developmental support, meaning identical circumstances impact people with drastically different severity. Perhaps most disturbing is how this unequal distribution trains some to expect and tolerate suffering, while others develop the expectation that pain is abnormal and should be immediately alleviated, creating different relationships to the inevitable difficulties of existence. Part 73. The Cruelty of Hope. Hope can become a form of cruelty when it prevents acceptance of unchangeable realities, keeping people locked in suffering as they wait for impossible resolutions. Terminal patients and their families often endure additional suffering through false hope rather than using limited remaining time for meaningful closure and presence. Relationships drag on for years or decades past viability because one or both parties maintain hope for change that all evidence suggests will never occur. Political and social movements sometimes sustain hope through denial of overwhelming contrary evidence, preventing adaptation to actual conditions while pursuing impossible outcomes. Parents of severely disabled children may sacrifice their entire lives waiting for improvements medical science clearly indicates will not happen, preventing adaptation that could create better quality of life for all involved. The cultural imperative to never give up hope can prevent necessary grieving, adaptation and acceptance that would allow new meaning to emerge from permanent losses. While temporary hope serves important psychological functions during surmountable challenges, persistent hope in the face of immutable realities often prevents the very acceptance needed for peace. Sometimes the most compassionate act is helping someone relinquish hope for what cannot be, allowing them to direct precious life energy toward what remains possible rather than what is forever lost. Part 74. The Double-Edged Sword of Memory. Our ability to remember creates both our greatest joys and most persistent suffering, with no way to preserve one without enabling the other. The same systems that store cherished memories of loved ones also preserve traumatic experiences, hurtful words and humiliating failures long after they've occurred. Memory allows us to learn from experience and maintain identity across time, yet also traps us in repetitive patterns and prevents full presence in the current moment. The most painful memories often remain the most vivid, with traumatic experiences receiving preferential encoding and retrieval compared to neutral or positive events. Attempts to suppress unwanted memories paradoxically strengthen their neural pathways, making intrusive recollections more likely rather than less. Even happy memories can become sources of pain when they highlight the contrast between past joy and present loss or limitation. The fading of memories feels like another kind of loss, as experiences and people important to us gradually become less vivid and detailed, despite our desire to preserve them perfectly. Perhaps the greatest irony is that those with exceptional autobiographical memory report no greater happiness and often more distress than those with average recall, suggesting that perfect remembering would increase suffering rather than satisfaction. Part 75. The Cruelty of Comparison. The human tendency to compare ourselves to others creates suffering that would not otherwise exist, transforming sufficient resources into perceived scarcity. People with comfortable lives, good health and loving relationships feel like failures when they compare themselves to those with more wealth, recognition or achievement. Social media has amplified this natural tendency by creating constant exposure to highly curated images of others' achievements, possessions, appearance and relationships. The areas where we most frequently compare ourselves to others reveal our deepest insecurities and unmet needs, creating recurring pain in precisely our most vulnerable places. Upward social comparison has been consistently shown to reduce subjective well-being and increase depression, yet knowledge of these effects rarely diminishes the behavior. Parents unknowingly transmit this source of suffering by comparing siblings or measuring children against peers, teaching them that inherent worth depends on relative position. Even when we surpass our comparison targets, the satisfaction proves temporary as we quickly identify new standards against which we again fall short. Perhaps most tragically, the habit of comparison often prevents us from recognizing and appreciating the genuine value and beauty of our actual lives, sacrificing present contentment for an impossible ideal. Part 76. The Narrowing of Possibility. With each passing year, the field of possibilities for our lives narrows, with doors closing permanently as biology, circumstances and prior choices limit future options. Certain careers, physical achievements and life paths become biologically impossible after specific ages, regardless of desire, effort or technological intervention. The accumulation of responsibilities, mortgage, children, aging parents, established career, gradually reduces freedom to make radical changes without harming dependence or abandoning commitments. Each major life decision eliminates countless alternative trajectories, with marriage, career choice and geographic location eliminating entire possible lives. The specialization required for success in modern society necessarily means abandoning development of many talents, interests and potentials to focus on a narrow slice of possible expression. Financial decisions made in early adulthood often constrain options for decades through debt, while wealth accumulated over decades can't buy back the physical capacities of youth. By midlife, many people realize they've narrowed their paths to the point where certain dreams must be permanently abandoned, creating a crisis of meaning and identity. The challenge of the second half of life becomes finding depth and richness within increasingly confined parameters rather than the expansive possibility that characterized youth. Part 77. The Prison of Expectation. Most human suffering stems not from actual conditions, but from the gap between expectation and reality, a self-created prison that follows us throughout life. Children raised with messaging about their exceptional futures often experience ordinary adulthood as failure, creating lifelong dissatisfaction regardless of actual circumstances. Cultural narratives about romance, success, family and aging create expectations that reality consistently fails to match, leading to a persistent sense that something is wrong with our normal experiences. The expectation that life should be fair, pain should be temporary, and effort should be rewarded creates bitterness when these assumptions collide with a world that operates by different principles. Religious and spiritual frameworks often create expectations of divine intervention, protection or justice that create crises of faith when suffering continues unabated. Even expectations about our own emotions, that grief should follow predictable stages or happiness should be our default state, create secondary suffering when actual experiences differ. Each expectation represents a premeditated resentment, a cognitive setup for future disappointment that we nonetheless clutch tightly as though it offers protection. Perhaps true freedom begins with recognizing that expectations are provisional maps rather than requirements, and that peace comes from adjusting the map to match the territory rather than demanding the territory conform to our preferred map. Part 78. The Futility of Preparation. Our most careful preparations often prove useless when actual challenges arise, while the difficulties that devastate us frequently come from directions we never thought to protect. Parents meticulously child-proof houses against common dangers only to have children develop rare conditions no prevention could have addressed. Financial planning for expected contingencies becomes irrelevant when economic systems collapse in unanticipated ways or health crises drain decades of careful saving. Educational preparation for specific career paths becomes obsolete when technologies or economic shifts eliminate entire industries between graduation and retirement. Psychological preparation for anticipated losses does little to soften the actual experience of grief, which proves overwhelming regardless of intellectual readiness. The disasters we most fear and prepare for rarely materialize, while unimagined difficulties blindside us despite vigilance and planning. This pattern creates a cruel irony. We spend enormous resources preparing for anticipated problems while remaining vulnerable to actual ones, yet cannot simply abandon preparation without increasing certain risks. Perhaps wisdom lies not in trying to anticipate every specific threat, but in developing general resilience, flexibility, and capacity to respond to the fundamental unpredictability that characterizes human existence. Part 79. The Tyranny of Potential. The recognition of potential in children often becomes a burden that distorts development and creates lifelong patterns of perfectionism and fear of failure. Praise for talent or intelligence rather than effort creates achievement, anxiety, and risk aversion, with gifted children often becoming underachieving adults, afraid to try anything they might not immediately master. Parents unconsciously transfer their own unfulfilled dreams to children who show aptitude, creating pressure to succeed not for personal satisfaction, but to validate parental worth and investment. Schools identify and track high-potential students, creating early pressure to maintain exceptional performance regardless of developing interests or strengths in other areas. The child labelled with high potential internalizes the message that their value lies in achievement rather than character, creating vulnerability to identity crisis when inevitable setbacks occur. The burden of representing family hopes, community exceptions, or racial and gender firsts places crushing pressure on those expected to fulfill collective dreams through individual achievement. When potential becomes expectation, the joy of discovery and mastery transforms into performance anxiety and fear of disappointing others' investment. Perhaps the kindest approach to potential is allowing it to unfold naturally through exposure and opportunity rather than identification and pressure, preserving the intrinsic motivation that sustains meaningful development. Part 80. The Fundamental Loneliness. No matter how many loving relationships we cultivate, each human consciousness remains fundamentally alone in its subjective experience of the world. The thoughts, sensations, emotions, and perceptions that constitute our moment-to-moment existence can be approximately described but never directly shared with another consciousness. Even in moments of profound intimacy or deep understanding, we remain separate experiencing subjects, connecting across a gap that can be narrowed but never eliminated. This isolation exists not because of insufficient love or communication skills, but because consciousness itself is inherently private and non-transferable between individuals. The desire to merge completely with another, to escape the confines of separate consciousness, motivates much of human behavior, yet remains fundamentally impossible to achieve. We develop elaborate languages, art forms, and technologies attempting to bridge this gap, creating profound connection that nonetheless falls short of the complete understanding we seek. This existential solitude becomes most apparent in moments of exceptional experience, profound grief, spiritual awakening, serious illness, when the limits of shared understanding become undeniable. Perhaps the most profound human connections come not from denying this fundamental aloneness, but from recognizing it as a universal condition we all share, creating compassion for the separate journey each consciousness must undertake. Part 81. The Price of Presence. True presence requires facing reality exactly as it is, without the comforting distortions and distractions that usually buffer us from full awareness. Becoming fully present to our lives means acknowledging limitations, mortality, loss and suffering that routine busyness and digital distraction help us avoid confronting directly. The mindfulness so casually recommended in contemporary wellness culture actually demands a radical courage to experience both physical and emotional discomfort without immediate escape. Presence with dying loved ones, with our own aging bodies, or with painful emotions requires abandoning the countless avoidance strategies that structure ordinary consciousness. Opening fully to the present moment means encountering not just appreciation for beauty, but also grief for impermanence, not just connection with others, but awareness of fundamental separation. The capacity for presence develops not through pleasant meditation retreats, but through willingness to stay with experiences we would instinctively flee, gradually building tolerance for unfiltered reality. This explains why genuine presence remains rare despite widespread interest. The actual experience proves far more challenging than the comforting concept suggests. Perhaps presence is not primarily about attending to positive sensations, but about developing the capacity to remain open and responsive to reality in all its aspects, both wonderful and terrible. Part 82. The Instability of Identity. The stable, continuous self we perceive is largely an illusion created by narrative and memory, concealing the constantly changing nature of consciousness. Brain studies reveal that the neural networks comprising you are in constant flux, with the physical substrate of identity literally rebuilding itself continuously at cellular and molecular levels. Experiences that dramatically alter consciousness, severe illness, trauma, psychedelics, spiritual awakening, often reveal how provisional and constructed our sense of continuous identity actually is. The you of early childhood bears little resemblance to your teenage self, which differs significantly from your current identity. Yet memory creates an illusion of continuous selfhood across these transformations. Different aspects of personality emerge in different relationships and contexts, with no single version representing the real you more authentically than others. The boundaries between self and non-self prove surprisingly fluid upon examination, with bodies constantly exchanging matter with environments and minds shaped by external information and relationship. This fundamental instability of identity creates both freedom and terror. Freedom from rigid self-concept, but terror at the recognition that the self we defend so vigorously lacks solid foundation. Perhaps wisdom involves holding identity lightly as a useful but provisional construct rather than an unchangeable essence, allowing flexibility and growth rather than rigid adherence to a fixed self-concept. Part 83. The Blindness of Conviction. The stronger our conviction in beliefs, values, or identities, the more effectively we filter out contradictory information, creating self-reinforcing bubbles of perception. The most dangerous certainty is meta-certainty, the conviction that our perspective is objective reality rather than one interpretation among many possible views. Strong beliefs literally change what information we notice, how we interpret ambiguous situations, and which memories we access, creating vastly different experiences of the same events. Political, religious, and ideological certainty correlates with activation of brain regions associated with identity and emotion, rather than with analytical reasoning. The comfort and meaning provided by strong conviction creates powerful incentives to preserve certainty, even when evidence suggests our beliefs may be incomplete or incorrect. The neural reward of having our existing beliefs confirmed often outweighs the value of new information, creating resistance to updating even among those who explicitly value truth-seeking. Historical examples repeatedly demonstrate that the most harmful human behaviors often stem not from doubt or confusion, but from absolute conviction in righteous causes. Perhaps intellectual humility, maintaining awareness of our cognitive limitations and the provisional nature of knowledge, represents not weakness, but a sophisticated, metacognitive achievement essential for genuine understanding. Part 84. The Comfort of Enemies. Having clear enemies provides psychological benefits that make conflict psychologically rewarding despite its practical costs. External opposition creates internal cohesion, transforming confusing internal disagreements into clarifying contrast with a demonized other. The certainty that problems stem from identifiable villains rather than complex systemic factors provides comforting simplicity in place of overwhelming complexity. Directing anger outward toward enemies feels more empowering than confronting intractable problems within systems or communities we identify with. Shared hatred creates stronger bonds than shared appreciation, with groups united against common enemies showing greater loyalty and sacrifice than those united by positive values. The psychological rewards of righteous opposition create unconscious incentives to maintain rather than resolve conflicts, explaining why peace processes so frequently collapse. Even after specific conflicts end, groups often seek new opponents to maintain the psychological benefits of opposition that have become central to identity and cohesion. Perhaps the most challenging aspect of mature citizenship involves resisting this comforting polarization and maintaining capacity to see complexity, commonality, and humanity even in those with whom we deeply disagree. Part 85. The Illusion of Justice. The deep human need to believe in cosmic justice persists despite overwhelming evidence that suffering and reward are not distributed according to moral desert. Children born into war zones with serious disabilities or to abusive parents have done nothing to deserve their suffering, contrary to various spiritual frameworks suggesting karmic explanations. Wealth, health, opportunity and recognition frequently flow to those who have harmed others, while compassion and service often go unrewarded or even result in exploitation. The belief that eventually justice will prevail, whether through social consequences, divine intervention or karmic balance, represents wishful thinking rather than observable reality. Legal systems at their best approximate rather than achieve justice, and at their worst actively reinforce existing inequalities while providing an illusion of fairness. The comfort of believing the world is ultimately just comes at the cost of blaming victims for their suffering and attributing privilege to merit rather than circumstance. When randomness and injustice become undeniable in our own lives, the collapse of the just world hypothesis often creates a secondary crisis of meaning and purpose. Perhaps true ethical development involves maintaining commitment to justice precisely because it doesn't exist naturally, representing a human value we must consciously create rather than a cosmic principle we can passively trust. Part 86. The Persistence of Childhood. The child we once were never truly disappears, but continues to exist within adult consciousness, influencing decisions and reactions in ways we rarely recognize. Emotional responses that seem disproportionate to current situations often represent the child self-reacting to echoes of early experiences now largely forgotten by the conscious mind. Relationship patterns established in early attachment relationships create templates that unconsciously replicate throughout adult life, seeking to resolve or repeat formative experiences. The inner critical voice that many experience as their own thoughts often directly reproduces caregivers' actual words and tones from childhood, maintaining their influence decades later. Professional choices, financial behaviors, and conflict styles frequently represent either repetition of or reaction against parental models absorbed before conscious memory formation. The freedom and rationality we associate with adulthood exist as a thin layer over deeper emotional structures formed during periods we can no longer consciously access. This explains why intellectual understanding of our patterns rarely creates lasting change. The child self that holds these patterns doesn't respond to adult logic, but to emotional experience and relational repair. Perhaps integration rather than elimination of the child self represents the most realistic goal of maturation, learning to respond to its needs with adult resources rather than pretending it no longer exists. Part 87. The Cost of Consciousness. Increasing awareness often leads initially to greater suffering rather than greater happiness, as we become conscious of problems we previously didn't recognize. Developing social consciousness about racism, inequality, environmental destruction or exploitation creates moral pain that the unaware person doesn't experience. Psychological growth frequently involves facing painful truths about ourselves, our relationships, and our participation in harmful systems before new possibilities can emerge. Consciousness of mortality, meaninglessness, isolation, and freedom, what existentialists call the ultimate concerns, creates anxiety that unreflective living temporarily avoids. Practices like meditation and mindfulness initially make us more aware of physical discomfort, emotional reactivity, and mental chatter that unconsciousness mercifully obscures. The development of empathy increases the suffering we experience in response to others' pain, expanding the circle of concern that affects our emotional state. This creates a painful paradox. The path to potential wisdom and compassion leads through increasing rather than decreasing awareness of suffering in ourselves and others. Perhaps this explains why many choose distraction over awareness. Despite potential long-term benefits, the initial cost of consciousness feels too high compared to the comfort of not knowing, not seeing, not feeling. Part 88. The Poverty of Words. Language creates the illusion of understanding while failing to capture the depths of actual human experience, especially in its most profound dimensions. The most transformative moments in human life, birth, death, profound love, spiritual experience, severe trauma, consistently evoke the response that there are no words to adequately convey their reality. Different languages enable different perceptions and cognitions, indicating that each linguistic system captures certain aspects of reality while necessarily missing others. The approximately 7,000 human languages collectively represent 7,000 different ways of constructing reality, each with unique capacities and limitations. Most people confuse the word with the thing it represents, mistaking our linguistic maps for the territories they incompletely describe. This limitation becomes most problematic in discussions of consciousness, spirituality, and emotion, where experiences outrun the capacity of language to adequately capture or convey them. The dominance of scientific materialism in contemporary discourse privileges phenomena that can be precisely described while marginalizing experiences that elude verbal capture. Perhaps true wisdom includes recognizing that our most important understandings may be precisely those that cannot be fully articulated, existing in realms of direct experience rather than symbolic representation. Part 89. The Limits of Will. The modern emphasis on willpower, discipline, and personal responsibility ignores the overwhelming evidence that human behavior is shaped primarily by factors outside conscious control. Genetics, early childhood environment, trauma history, socio-economic context, and social networks influence outcomes far more powerfully than individual choice or effort. Studies consistently show that behaviors we attribute to willpower, from addiction recovery to weight management to career success, correlate more strongly with environmental factors than with personal characteristics. The factors that most significantly predict life outcomes, such as where and to whom you were born, are precisely those over which individuals have no control whatsoever. Self-control itself varies with blood glucose levels, sleep quality, stress exposure, and cognitive load, making it more a fluctuating resource than a stable character trait. Our brains make most decisions before conscious awareness, with the experience of choosing often representing post hoc rationalization rather than causal deliberation. The belief in powerful individual agency serves social and economic systems by attributing structural inequalities to personal failure, thereby justifying existing hierarchies. Perhaps true empowerment begins with acknowledging these limitations on individual will, allowing us to design environments that support desired behaviors rather than relying on willpower that inevitably fluctuates and fails. Part 90. The Mirage of Arrival. Throughout life we pursue goals believing their achievement will bring lasting satisfaction, only to discover that accomplishment creates temporary pleasure followed by emptiness and new striving. The promotion, relationship, recognition or acquisition we believe will finally make us happy provides excitement that quickly fades as hedonic adaptation returns us to baseline satisfaction. This pattern creates the arrival fallacy, the persistent belief that happiness awaits at the next destination despite repeated experiences proving this untrue. External achievements can never satisfy internal needs for meaning, connection and purpose, creating a tragic situation where people sacrifice present well-being for future satisfaction that never materializes. Each milestone reached simply reveals the next horizon of desire, creating an endless cycle of striving without arrival at any final state of contentment. This psychological treadmill accelerates in consumer societies where marketing deliberately creates new desires and dissatisfactions to maintain economic growth. By the time many people recognize this pattern, they've spent decades pursuing destinations without cultivating the capacity to enjoy the journey, creating regret for time lost to future-focused striving. Perhaps wisdom involves recognizing that life consists entirely of journey without arrival, and that genuine satisfaction comes not from achieving endpoints, but from finding meaning in the ongoing process of becoming. Part 91. The Empty Victory. Many people achieve exactly the goals they set for themselves only to discover the accomplishment feels hollow, meaningless, or actively disappointing rather than fulfilling. The emptiness following long-sought achievement often feels more painful than failure, as it undermines the organizing belief that success would bring satisfaction and meaning. This pattern appears across domains: athletes winning championships, authors publishing books, professionals reaching career milestones, suggesting it represents a fundamental aspect of human psychology rather than domain-specific disappointment. The experience of, "Is this all there is?" following achievement creates crises of meaning precisely when external validation is highest, revealing the inadequacy of accomplishment to provide lasting purpose. This emptiness stems partly from the loss of purpose and structure that striving provided, leaving achievers without the organizing principle that previously guided decisions and created motivation. Many respond by quickly setting new, larger goals, creating a lifetime pattern of achievement without satisfaction that ultimately feels like running on a treadmill that accelerates with age. This cycle continues until illness, aging, or existential crisis forces confrontation with the fundamental inadequacy of achievement to provide the meaning and fulfillment it seemed to promise. Perhaps this empty victory represents an invitation to discover intrinsic sources of meaning and satisfaction rather than continuing to pursue external markers that inevitably disappoint regardless of their magnitude. Part 92. The Future's Absence. Everything that currently exists, everyone you love, and all human accomplishment will eventually disappear completely. leaving no trace in a universe that continues without us. The most enduring human creations, pyramids, cathedrals, literary masterpieces, represent the briefest moment in cosmic time, temporary arrangements that entropy will inevitably erase. Digital records we imagine as permanent will become corrupted or inaccessible within decades or centuries, while physical artifacts decay despite our best preservation efforts. Languages spoken today will eventually join Latin and ancient Greek as historical curiosities, rather than living communication systems, making even our most carefully preserved writings unintelligible. Geological and astronomical processes will eventually erase all evidence that humanity ever existed, regardless of what we achieve or how we attempt to preserve it. The people remembered as world-changing historical figures represent a vanishingly small percentage of humans who lived with the overwhelming majority forgotten within 3 generations. This perspective renders most human concerns, status, wealth accumulation, legacy building, fundamentally absurd when viewed against the backdrop of cosmic time and inevitable dissolution. Perhaps the recognition of ultimate impermanence does not negate meaning, but transforms it, shifting value from permanent impact to quality of experience and relationship in the brief moment we exist. Part 93. The Paradox of Choice. The abundance of options in modern life often creates paralysis, dissatisfaction and regret rather than the freedom and happiness we expect from increased choice. Research consistently shows that beyond a modest threshold, additional options create diminishing returns and eventually negative outcomes as decision fatigue and opportunity cost increase. The modern condition of facing hundreds of options for everything from careers to breakfast cereals creates constant evaluation demands that deplete mental resources needed for presence and enjoyment. Each decision carries not only the effort of choosing, but also the potential regret for options declined, creating a cognitive burden our ancestors rarely experienced. The pressure to optimize every choice, finding not just a good option, but the absolute best option, creates anxiety that diminishes satisfaction with even objectively excellent selections. Social media dramatically amplifies this effect by showing countless alternative lives we could be living, creating perpetual FOMO, fear of missing out, regardless of our actual circumstances. Many people secretly long for fewer choices and clearer paths, despite cultural messaging that unlimited options represent progress and freedom. Perhaps wisdom involves recognizing that constraints often enable rather than restrict flourishing, and that embracing limitations can paradoxically increase satisfaction by eliminating the cognitive burden of endless possibility. Part 94. The Mythology of Closure. The tidy emotional resolution we call closure rarely arrives in the form we expect, leaving many waiting for a psychological state that may never materialize. Traumatic experiences, significant losses and profound betrayals become integrated into our ongoing narrative rather than neatly concluded, changing form rather than disappearing completely. The expectation of clean closure often creates a secondary suffering as people blame themselves for still feeling pain they believe should have been resolved through time or proper processing. Some wounds continue to ache when the weather changes, literally or metaphorically, becoming quiescent rather than healed in any final sense. Relationships frequently end without clear explanation or mutual understanding, leaving questions that will never receive answers and ambiguities that remain unresolved. The rituals we create to mark endings, funerals, divorce proceedings, farewell parties, provide structure but rarely deliver the emotional completion they symbolize. Certain betrayals, losses and regrets will trouble us until our dying day, resistant to every therapeutic technique, spiritual practice or meaning-making framework. Perhaps maturity involves accepting that certain experiences permanently change us rather than pass through us, becoming part of who we are rather than chapters we can fully close and leave behind. Part 95. The Weight of Witness. Those who directly witness suffering often carry burdens invisible to others, experiencing profound changes to their worldview and emotional capacity. First responders, healthcare workers, war correspondents, and humanitarian aid workers observe human suffering that permanently alters their understanding of what humans can endure and inflict. Parents of chronically ill children witness ongoing pain they cannot alleviate, carrying knowledge of suffering that separates them from parents of healthy children who take wellness for granted. Survivors of war, natural disasters or genocide bear witness to human vulnerability and cruelty at scales that cannot be fully communicated to those without similar experience. This witnessing changes the brain's actual structure and function, creating not just memories but altered perception of safety, trust and meaning that persists across contexts. Those carrying the burden of witness often find they cannot share what they've seen without either traumatizing others or receiving responses that minimize or deny realities they cannot unsee. This creates a profound isolation as witnesses recognize that their experience has placed them in a different experiential category from those whose worldview remains protected by ignorance of what they've observed. Perhaps the most profound form of compassion involves willingness to hear these testimonies without turning away, sharing the burden of knowledge without the false comfort of denial or premature reassurance. Part 96. The Persistence of Mystery. Despite centuries of scientific advancement, the most fundamental aspects of existence remain as mysterious as they were to our earliest ancestors. Consciousness itself, the very ground of our experience, continues to defy complete scientific explanation, with no consensus on how subjective experience emerges from physical processes. The apparent existence of something rather than nothing represents a philosophical question that neither science nor religion has satisfactorily resolved, despite its fundamental nature. The boundary between life and non-life, mind and matter, and self and other proves increasingly blurry rather than clearer with advanced investigation. Scientific progress often expands the territory of known unknowns while simultaneously revealing how much remains beyond our current capacity to even formulate appropriate questions. Each major scientific revolution has not only answered existing questions, but revealed entire domains of inquiry previously unimagined, suggesting this pattern will continue indefinitely. The most profound human experiences, love, meaning, beauty, spiritual awakening, continue to resist reduction to their component parts, maintaining their mystery despite sophisticated analysis. Perhaps intellectual humility, maintaining appropriate awe before the vastness of what remains unknown and possibly unknowable, represents not a failure of inquiry, but its most sophisticated achievement. Part 97. The Inescapable Body. No matter how sophisticated our technology or expansive our consciousness, we remain fundamentally embodied beings whose mental states depend on physical conditions. Mood, perception, motivation, and cognitive function fluctuate with blood glucose, hormone levels, gut microbiome composition, and inflammatory markers largely outside conscious control. The mind we identify as self exists not as pure consciousness, but as an emergent property of a physical system subject to biological constraints and vulnerabilities. Illness, pain, and aging inevitably alter consciousness regardless of mental discipline or spiritual development, reminding us that transcendence remains temporary and partial. The body keeps count of experiences the conscious mind may repress or deny, storing trauma in physical symptoms that emerge whether acknowledged or not. Modern life increasingly treats embodiment as an inconvenient limitation to be overcome through technology, ignoring the potential wisdom and groundedness that comes through physical existence. The final stages of life often bring increasing recognition of our fundamental embodiment, as physical needs and limitations can no longer be ignored or subordinated to mental ambition. Perhaps wisdom involves neither rejecting embodiment as limitation nor identifying completely with the body, but recognizing corporeality as the necessary condition through which consciousness experiences and expresses itself in this lifetime. Part 98. The Myth of Independence. The prized Western ideal of independence represents a fiction that obscures the fundamental interdependence characterizing human existence at every level. No human has ever survived infancy without extensive care from others, making complete dependence our universal first experience rather than a condition to be avoided. The apparent self-sufficiency of adulthood disguises absolute dependence on complex social systems for food, shelter, protection, knowledge and meaning. Even the most isolated individual relies on countless others, from farmers to factory workers to infrastructure maintainers, whose labour makes contemporary survival possible. Our thoughts themselves develop not in isolation, but through language acquired from others, making even our inner life a collaborative rather than solitary creation. The cells comprising our bodies contain mitochondria with separate evolutionary origins, while our microbiome consists of trillions of non-human organisms necessary for our functioning. The very air we breathe depends on photosynthesis performed by plants, creating literal interdependence at the level of breath between humans and the broader living system. Perhaps true maturity involves not achieving mythical independence but becoming conscious of our interdependence, assuming appropriate responsibility within the systems that sustain us rather than pretending we stand apart from them. Part 99. The Final Solitude. Despite our best efforts to accompany others through life, each person ultimately faces death as a profoundly solitary experience that cannot be truly shared. Even surrounded by loving family and supported by skilled caregivers, the dying person crosses a threshold that witnesses can observe but never join. The most intimate relationships and deepest spiritual practices may prepare us for this transition, but cannot eliminate its fundamentally solitary nature. This final solitude often begins before death itself, as the dying person enters experiential territory increasingly difficult to communicate to those not yet on the threshold. Many report feeling most alone, not when physically isolated, but when surrounded by others, who cannot or will not acknowledge the reality of their dying. The technological extension of life often increases rather than diminishes this isolation, creating prolonged periods when meaningful connection becomes increasingly difficult. Some wisdom traditions suggest that preparing for this ultimate solitude represents an essential spiritual practice, developing capacity to face the unknown without requiring others to make it safe or comprehensible. Perhaps accepting rather than denying the ultimately solitary nature of dying might transform not only our relationship to death, but also our appreciation for the temporary miracle of shared consciousness while living. Part 100. The Cost of Wisdom. True wisdom often comes at tremendous cost, earned through suffering, loss and disillusionment, rather than through comfortable study or pleasant contemplation. The most profound human insights typically emerge from direct encounter with pain, limitation, and contradiction that intellectual understanding alone cannot resolve. Those considered wise in virtually all cultural traditions have usually endured significant hardship that transformed their perspective rather than simply accumulating knowledge or techniques. The awakening to deeper understanding frequently involves painful recognition of previous delusions, requiring surrender of comforting beliefs that provided security but limited growth. Wisdom developed through suffering carries a bittersweet quality. The understanding gained rarely feels worth the price paid to acquire it, yet cannot be regretted once attained. Those who achieve genuine wisdom often find they cannot simply convey their understanding to others still operating from previous paradigms, creating an isolating gap between their perspective and conventional thinking. Perhaps most poignantly, wisdom often arrives too late to benefit the person in their earlier struggles, becoming most clear precisely when major life decisions have already been made. The ultimate paradox may be that wisdom itself includes recognizing that no understanding, however profound, can fully justify or redeem the suffering through which it was gained, yet this recognition itself represents a form of liberation.